CD, Kieran? Okay, I want to talk to you about depression. I want to talk to you about depression because depression is real. Depression covers a lot of different concepts and entities, but 2020 has been a very difficult year. It's been a very difficult year. You've had COVID, you've had a political unrest, you have had social unrest, you have had the world spinning out of control and instability growing, and there's been little to hold on to in the world, and the only thing stable we have in our life is the truth, which is the only stabilizing force that we have. But even those of us who stand on the rock of Messiah and the truth of God deal with the ramifications of depression. And it's something that I felt was a requirement for us to look at. And looking in the Bible, when you think about the Bible, who do you think about battled with depression? You know, who are the main key players that battled with depression? To varying degrees. The most obvious is Elijah. Hannah, because she couldn't have a baby. You have Job, who said, I just lost everything. I'll just sit here and die. You have Yeshua. Father, if possible, let this pass from me. Father, why have you forsaken me? It's that downturn in our lives, even among believers, even among Bible people. It's David when the prophet came in and said, "You're the man." And he was crushed. And I was going to give a message on that, but I chose Elijah. I chose Elijah because I identify with him and what he is doing. Because Elijah was a very successful prophet. He is known rightfully as a very successful prophet. And he was called to a very difficult ministry because he was going to the northern kingdom, which was always a godless kingdom, to one of the most ungodly kings of the ungodly kingdom, Ahab. Okay? Ahab. And so he was called to be a prophet to an evil king and his evil queen, Jezebel, at a time when all of the northern kingdom of Israel was apostate. And his calling was incredible. It's a huge calling. And in 1 Kings 17, beginning in verse 1, I'm going to stay in verse 17, I think, mostly, if you want to open your Bibles. Now Elijah the Tishbite, one of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab the king, "As Adonai, God of Israel, lives before whom I stand, there shall be no dew or rain these years except by my word." And so he goes up to the very powerful, evil king with his wife Jezebel in an apostate kingdom and says, "As sure as the God of Israel lives, no more rain." And then the next verse 2, the word of Adonai came to him. Now that you've done that particular task, what I want you to do is verse 3. "Leave this place, turn eastward, and hide yourself by the wadi." In English, I don't know how to say it in English. Kerith, on the other side of the Jordan. So here's what you're going to do. Go tell this powerful king, it's not going to rain anymore until I say it will. Now go hide. Okay? You just confronted the king. All right? Good idea to go hide. Going to be a drought, so I want you to hide where there's a stream. Okay? And here's what you're going to do in verse 4. "It will come about that you will drink from the wadi. I have also commanded ravens to free you." So there's not going to be any rain. So go hide yourself. But hide where there's a wadi, where there's a stream, so you have something to drink. And you're not going to be able to eat anything, so I'll use an unclean bird, a raven, which is an unclean bird, to bring you food. And being a faithful prophet, in the next verse, so he went and did according to the word of Adonai. He went and lived by the Wadi Kerith, which is east of the Jordan. In other words, he went to the east bank instead of the west bank. He crossed over into what is today Jordan. And so he's hiding. He's hiding from the king, because you don't just confront a king. The king says, oh, okay. So he's hiding, and he has a place to drink. Verse 6, the ravens kept bringing him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the wadi. Well, that has its own ramifications, because the raven is an unclean bird, and the ravens come and drop off bread and meat for him to eat in the morning and the evening, and during the day he could drink from the brook, right? He's living out in away from the king, hiding out. But there's a problem when you're living off a stream in a place where there's no rain. What's going to happen? The next verse 7, came to pass after a while the wadi dried up, because there had been no rain in the world, in the land, excuse me. Now he's standing there. He's sitting there. He's in bushes. Goes, drinks when he wants to drink. Every morning a raven shows up, drops some food and meat and bread, and he eats and meat and bread. Then the wadi dries up, because he has a successful ministry. He said there would be no rain, and indeed, there's no more water. Now he has no water to drink. You can't live by bread and meat, even if the raven bring it to you. But it's a sign that you're successful. Your ministry is successful when things get harder, because what you said would happen actually comes to pass. There's nothing easy anymore. And so now that has happened, God speaks to him again in verse 8. Then the word of Adonai came to him. God said, by the way, verse 9, arise, go to Zarephath of Sidon up in Lebanon, and stay there. I've commanded a widow to provide for you. Now he's going to go from the east bank of Jordan all the way up and around to the coast of Lebanon today, Sidon. And he's going to go to this widow who has enough to feed herself one meal, and then she's going to die. And the prophet says, no problem, you feed me, because God said to, and he'll take care of things. You know, there's nothing easy about doing what God tells you to do sometimes. And even though your ministry is successful, it doesn't look like it is. Now, you know, I went from being fed by ravens to being fed by a widow. No indication she was Jewish, by the way, because she's up in Sidon. And I'll use this woman to take care of you, even though she has nothing. But you know I'm with you, because I'll increase what she has to take care of you in the time that you are there. And so this goes on for a couple years. What's happening? Well, there's no rain. The whole nation has been suffering droughts. The king and queen are angry as they ever could be against this prophet, who has disappeared. So what does God do? Oh, you know, time to go back to Ahab. And so he goes back, drifts south till he's up on the top of Mount Carmel at Mukharbah, which is where he challenged, if you've been on our tours, that's where, up there is where he challenged the prophets. And so That's all the way down to chapter 18, verse 20. So Ahab sent word to all the children of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. So he challenges the whole nation, the northern kingdom only, Israel. Okay, there's a southern kingdom called Judah. They're not a part of this ministry. And he says, everybody gathered together, including all the prophets, not God's prophets, the prophets of the king and queen. And then he gets up in front of the people and before all the prophets of Baal, who is the main god of that particular kingdom at that point in history, in verse 21. He approached the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If Adonai is God, follow him. If Baal is, follow him. And the people did not answer him, not even a word. So he gets up in front of all the people and said, look, if the God of Israel is God, you need to worship him. And if Baal is God, then you need to worship him. And the people said, what do you do with that? Well, you kind of, you see, I want to read a little bit more because I want you to see what was going on inside of him. Very successful, but a successful ministry doesn't mean everything's going smooth. All right? As a matter of fact, a successful ministry can be full of stressful things in this world. He's got a lot of stress, even though God is speaking to him. He's very successful in his ministry, but he's full of stress. Verse 22, is that where I'm going? I'm not looking at my notes. Whatever's next. 22. Elijah said to the people, I'm the only prophet of Adonai left, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Well, he says something that you should see. I'm the only prophet that's left. Here I am by myself. Because that's the biggest thing with depression is the feeling that you're alone. It's the alone. You see, it's not always, I'll get into this a little bit more. I'm going to go quickly through this. There's a lot of reasons for depression, including chemical. You could have a chemical imbalance. I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't mean to, but most of the chemical balance is inside of you, and that's very real. And sometimes you can take a medication that will help the chemical imbalance within you. And if you have a chemical imbalance, it's okay to take something to try to balance the chemicals within you. But the reality is most of the imbalances don't come from what is out of tune within us. It's what is out of tune without us. It's not what's here, it's what's out there. And here's the reality. I'm all alone and nobody cares. I'm the only one left. Paul has 450 prophets. I'm alone. I'm here. I'm in front of you. The king's on your side. The queen's on your side. The people are on your side. They're not on your side. They're not on anybody's side. They're paying attention. He says, I'm all alone. You need to see that. That's still in him. It's like, I'm the prophet. Okay? He didn't say I'm the prophet. He said, I'm the only prophet. I'm all by myself. I have a really successful ministry, but really it's only me. I'm alone. I'm alone. And you can see there's stress in his life, even in the height of his ministry, confronting the people according to the word of the Lord. If God of Israel is God, worship him. If Baal's God, worship him. And they sit there and say, and? And he said, look, I'm the only one here. I'm all by myself. I'm all alone. And that's the first sign of depression. It's not that you're despondent over life. It's that you're so alone and nobody else even knows how alone you are. He announced, I am alone. And that is the first sign of depression when you feel like, I'm alone. I'm alone. And you feel like you're alone because you're one of those peculiar people that nobody understands. Like Elijah. I'm here doing something very successful. I'm doing exactly what God said to do, but I feel so alone. I feel such stress over being by myself. Verse 23, now let them give us 2 young bulls let them choose one. Give us 2 young bulls. Let them choose one for themselves and cut into pieces, lay on the altar of wood and put no fire underneath. So the people, they prepared the other bull, laid on the wood, put no fire underneath. And then you continue with that in verse 24. Call on the name of your God, Baal, and I will call on the name of Adonai, and the God who answers by fire. He is God. And the people says, yeah, that would work. Okay, they can agree to that. The God who answers with fire, he will be God. Now, he's doing what God told him. He has faith that God is going to do what he said to do, and he's standing there doing what God told him to do, but he feels alone, and he feels stressed. Because here's the reality. I know God's going to do this, but boy, if he doesn't, I'm already in trouble. Not that I waver in my faith. It's just that the stress of being in God's ministry can sometimes touch our lives in the very real world. And we think we can't get through this because we're so much by ourselves. Now, you all know the story. They do this, they call out, they start cutting themselves. That's to get Baal's attention. He's teasing them. Maybe he's asleep, maybe he's going to the bathroom. Come on, get louder. And they go wild, trying to get Baal to answer, and nothing happens. Down to verse 36. Now it's time for the offering of the evening sacrifice. So it's time for the evening sacrifice, about 5 in the afternoon. He came near and said, Adonai, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Let everybody know, you're God, I'm your servant. I'm alone. Let them know you're God, I'm yours. Let them know. Let them know I've done all these things. Verse 37, answer me, Adonai, answer me, so that these people may know that you, Adonai, are God, that you have turned their heart back again. That's the real message. I just threw in, let them know that I'm with you, because this is stressful. And then the verse 38, the fire of Adonai fell, consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and licked the water from the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, Adonai, he is God. Adonai, he is God. You recognize this from the High Holy Day liturgy. Adonai, hu-ha, Elohim. Adonai, hu-ha, Elohim. The Lord is God. The Lord is God. Adonai, hu-ha, Elohim. So God answered by fire. God proved that he was real and Elijah was his prophet. And then you get to chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel what Elijah had done and how he had slain all the prophets with a sword because he killed them all. And so in verse 2, Jezebel sent a messenger Elijah saying, so let the gods do to me and worse by this time tomorrow if I don't make your life like one of them. Now here's a guy who's just a prophet of God. He's like one of the most incredible prophets of God, so loyal. God always shows up. And he says, but I'm so alone. This is so much stress. You showed up. Yes. The people all said, Adonai, hu Elohim. And the queen says, yeah, well, I'm going to kill you too. So what's the reaction of a man of God in the next verse? He's frightened. He got up and ran for his life. Like, what? You know, if God did that for me, I wouldn't get up and run for my life. But the reality, even when God is doing something miraculous, there's so much stress involved. I just got to run for my life. When he came to Beersheba, which belonged to Beersheba, way down south. Beersheba, way down south. He left Israel, went way down south in Judah, and he left his servant there. He was all alone. Of course, the servant was there, but he doesn't count. Because the servant doesn't have the calling. He's alone. But he's running for his life, and he can't run for his life with somebody else because he's alone, so he leaves the servant there so he can go on alone. Because he feels alone. He feels alone. That's depression. I feel alone. I feel alone. I can't do this. I'm stressed. I'm stressed. I'm stressed. God is here. God is showing up. God is proving himself to be God. But I want to be, I'm alone. I'm alone. You need to stay here because I'm alone. You know, I can't keep running away saying I'm alone when I have my sidekick with me. You leave. I'm going to go because I'm alone. And I'm going to prove I'm alone by leaving you here. And I want you to see that. He's alone. I don't know who his servant is. Some say it's Elisha. We don't know. Doesn't seem to be, but some people, I would say no, but I know some people who think it was Elisha. But it doesn't say that, and I don't lean towards that. But he wanted to be by himself because he felt like by himself, even when obviously he wasn't by himself. Because obviously we're never by ourselves, but depression is, I feel like I'm alone. I feel like I'm by myself. Verse 4. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat under a broom bush, and he prayed that he might die. He walks for a day by himself. Now, he is really by himself because he left his servant, and he goes, sits under a broom bush, his ties to, never mind, Jonah, and some other things happening. And he sits there, and it's too much. Take my life. I'm no better than my father's. You know, I've done all you want to do. Kill me. He's not going to kill himself. He's not despondent to the point of death. He's despondent to the point is I can't go on even though I know God is real. I can't go on even though I see God working in my life. I can't go on because I feel alone. Kill me. Kill me. I don't want to do this anymore. Successful ministry does not save me from depression. Successful ministry doesn't mean you won't have problems. Successful ministry can mean more stress than ever that touches your life. I'm no better than my fathers. Then he laid down and slept under the broom bush, in verse 5. And then behold, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He lays down, takes a nap. He's exhausted. He's emotionally exhausted. It's an emotional exhaustion. Even though God just answered by fire a few hundred miles north, but God did answer by fire, and everybody saw that he was God, and Elijah was the prophet of God. But now I'm alone. I'm going to take a nap. And an angel wake him up and said, get up and eat. God sent an angel to minister to him. And you have to see that. He was running away because of depression. It did not change God's attitude towards him. God was not angry. God was not upset. God was not going to punish him or teach him. He's a get up and eat. In the next verse 6, it says, so he looked in surprise. By his head there was a cake baked on the hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and laid down again. He said, look, you've worn yourself out. You're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and you feel like you're all alone. You need some strength. Take a nap. Wake up. Get something to eat, a little bit of nourishment. You need to be stronger here. You need to be stronger. You've gotten yourself down. Be stronger. Take a nap. Take a nap, all right? Next verse, so the angel came to him a second time, touched him and said, get up and eat because the journey is too much for you. He takes another nap. The angel word, look, your journey is much too difficult. It was his journey difficult because God had called him on a difficult journey? No. He took a difficult journey because he was depressed. It was not running away from God. He was running away from within himself because he was so depressed he couldn't do anything anymore, even though he knew God was there. And God said, take a nap. Now eat, get some strength. Now take another nap and eat because this journey is too difficult for you. He didn't say, by the way, you're not supposed to be down here. You're supposed to be up there. He said, you've gone over 1,000 miles, which is not true in Israel. It's probably 700 miles. From Carmel down to Beersheba in the south. Your journey's too difficult. You need to be strengthened. Have some food. Have some food, okay? So he gets strengthened in verse 8. He rose, ate, and drank, and in the strength of that meal, he was so supernaturally refreshed by eating what God had given him. 40 days and 40 nights he went into Horeb, the mountain of God. Hung a right and went into Egypt. Climbed on the mountain of God. Still moving away from what he's supposed to be calling to do, right? But God is still with him, trying to shore him up. You're alone. You need to be strengthened. You rest, get strengthened. Rest, get strengthened. Now go. And he goes into the mountain of God. A lot of people, I won't get into what a lot of people think about this. It's just do what the Bible says. And he goes into a cave. He goes into a cave. Good place to be alone. Because you're alone, but at least you're not going to get rained on. And he goes in the cave and he's all by himself. And he spent the night there. In other words, he slept. And behold, the word of Adonai came to him again. So God's going, I'm going to speak to you again. What are you doing here? You notice he didn't ask this on the journey. He just strengthened him so he could take the journey. Why? Because he needed the journey, and he needed the journey because he was in depression. He was fighting depression. And when you're in depression, God doesn't come to you and say, what are you doing there? First, you need to rest and strengthen yourself. And once you rest and strengthen yourself so you are refurbished in your inner being, God will simply ask, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Verse 10. And he lets it out. I have been very zealous for Adonai Tzvaot, the warrior God. He said, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, turned down your altars, slain your prophets' word. I alone am left, and they're seeking my life to take it. I'm all alone. I'm all alone. Don't you know what's going on? You want to know what I'm doing here? I'll tell you what I'm doing here. They killed everybody. Now they're trying to kill me. I'm all alone. I'm all alone. I'm hiding in a cave way down here. Wherever way down here is verse 11. He said, come out and stand before the mount of Adonai. And behold, Adonai was passing by, a great and mighty wind, tearing a mountain, shattering a cliff before Adonai, but Adonai was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but Adonai no, don't go. Go back if you can. Was not in the earthquake. So all these things start happening. All these things start happening. Great, mighty wind, tearing of the mountain, shattering cliffs. But that God's not there. A lot of things going on, but that's not God. Now the next verse, Johnny, 12. The earthquake of fire, and it was not in the fire. After fire, a soft whisper of a voice. A lot of flash, just like up on the mountain where he came with fire. A lot of flash. God's stepping back into his life. But God's not in the flash. That's not God. God is in this whisper, soft whisper of a voice. And God says, now that we've gotten all this other stuff out of the way, I want to speak to you. Verse 13. As soon as he heard it, he wrapped himself in the mantle, went out and stood in the entrance cave. All of a sudden, a voice addressed him and said, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? I want you to see something that he was there because of depression. See where I am. Got to see, he's battling a little bit of depression, not because he's not successful in ministry, not because he's not hearing from God. As a matter of fact, God is carrying him through this season of depression that God did not give him. He had it nonetheless. Things happen in our life that really pull us down, and we don't become despondent for life. We just get to the point where I'm so alone and nobody cares. And God will ask the same question over and over, but he'll strengthen us until we can get through. What are you doing here? Verse 14. And he said, I've been very zealous for Adonai's vote, for the children of Israel have forsaken you and your covenant, your altars, slain your prophets, and I alone am left. They're seeking to take my life. The same complaint. I'm still alone. You're here. I'm alone. And God said, that's okay because you're stronger now because I've strengthened you. And so verse 15. Adonai said, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Okay, you're strong enough now. You've wallowed in your depression enough. Now that I've strengthened you where you are, it's not a rebuke. Get back to your calling. Go back and replace Ahab with Hazael. Go. And while you're doing that, in verse 16, anoint Jehu, son of Nishmi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, the son of Shaphat, as the prophet in your place. He's the only prophet. He said, you know what? You just tell Elisha he's the prophet now. Verse 17, I didn't read that yet. It shall come to pass when whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, because he's putting in a king who's going to kill people, Jehu will slay. Whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will slay. The battle continues. But you know what? You've done what you were called to do. You really can't go on. You really got yourself into a bad place, and you don't have to carry it any further. You've done enough. Let's move on. I no longer need somebody to make the people know there is a God. You have helped them to understand there is a God. It's time to a new season. You need a new leader. And God points out to him in the next verse, I have preserved 7,000 Israel whose knees have not bowed to Baal, whose mouth is not the kingdom. You're alone. You're not alone. There's already another prophet ready to take your place, and there's still 7,000 people that are loyal, have always been loyal to me. And I chose Elijah, I chose Elijah because I identify with him. I planted this congregation in 1987. It was very successful. And just before I was 27 years old. You need to know this. About every 5 years, I simply collapsed. I'm driven, I'm passionate, and I will go and go and go. And I averaged every 5 years I collapsed, and I had to be given a month off to go reinvigorate myself. Not because I was despondent, not because God wasn't working. It's because of the stress of doing what is I consider a successful ministry, although I had to continually change, which is part of what ministry is about. And the board of directors 9 years ago, in their wisdom and generosity, said, let's give him a month off every 4 years. And maybe he won't burn out every 5 years. And the first time I had to wait 5 years because of the timing of it. And then last year, I was just holding on by my fingernails trying to get to my sabbatical. And some of you here saw it. I was struggling, not because I was doubting God, not because I was doubting the calling, not because God wasn't moving. I was in depression. I was feeling so alone. I told my wife, I feel like I'm pulling an ocean liner uphill and people are throwing anchors out on this side. And I feel so alone. You know, there it is. So God said, okay, let's go sit on a mountain for a month. Praise God, because I'm refurbished. And see, depression doesn't mean, I didn't have a chemical imbalance. I had an imbalance in my life out here. It's an imbalance. It happens to all of us. It happens to you. And in the letter of Jacob, which is James, in honor of King James, it's written 5:17. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. Elijah was just like us. He was a man with a nature just like us. He had a calling of God. He had a successful ministry. And he had to deal with depression. That had nothing to do with God's plan in his life. But he had a nature like us. And it's easy for us to succumb to depression. You see, even when we have a hope of heaven, the pain on earth can weigh heavy on you. Even when you're living in God's grace, the darkness of depression can be very real. And we end up going from the mountaintop with God answering by fire to the cave where we're alone. And even when you cave into the darkness of depression, which is what it is. I'm running in a cave. I'm so by myself, but at least it's not raining in here. And you're hiding out. You're not really hiding out from God because you have faith. You know you're not hiding out from God. You're hiding out from everybody else because they don't get it and you're alone. No matter how much you feel alone, God is with you even in the darkness. He said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. How does this help? And I'll paint a picture, and I'm going to end pretty soon. I'm just going to sum this up. You feel the blues. You ever feel the blues? Do you know what it means to feel the blues? In the 17th century, you're out there sailing across the ocean. This is where this came from. And you're sailing across the ocean, the captain dies. And you're sailing, but you don't know where you're going now. So you're out on the ocean, and you're moving, but you're not really sure where you're going very often because the captain died. And now, like, he's the only one that knew where we were going. And so you raise a blue flag up on the mast, or you paint a blue stripe on the front of your ship. And as you're sailing, you want others to know that you're not a threat, you just lost your way. I'm here, I don't know where we are, I don't know what we're coming near, I don't know where we're going, we're not a threat, we have just lost our way. We are blue. Because we have lost our way, and we need help so we could find our direction. The blues were picked by the I don't know, there's no good way to explain the barbarity of American slavery. But American slaves and liberated slaves sang the blues. Because a lot of them were raised by barbaric Christian masters who read the Bible to them, and they identified so strongly with Moses and the people of Israel who were mistreated and in slavery. They understood that, and they became believers, and they'd sing the blues. Go down Moses. They were blues. Why? Because they had lost their way. They were just trying to find direction. And see, that's what it is. See, depression is real. You need to know that. Let's just talk. Depression is real. There can be biological factors, and medication can help because you can have chemical imbalances that need drug treatment. That's very real. And that's something God has given us. But our depression problems often are beleaguered by the imbalances in the way that we live. Rick Warren, who actually made some corrections that a lot of people don't know because you haven't talked to him. I quote him, if we're burning our candle at both ends, we're not as bright as we think we are. See, he built a real big church, then came to the realization they weren't believers. He was a very successful marketer to grow a large church. And I want you to know, he came to awakening. The vast majority of his people had no idea what it meant to be saved. And he did make that correction years ago. I talked to him. And here's what I want you to know. Be honest about how you're feeling. Because number one, if you struggle with depression, there is no quick fix. What I had to do is get away. I went up on a mountaintop with my wife, beautiful view, and the only time I left was to go and lift weights, and I just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. I lifted a lot of weights. I lifted weights every day. And I didn't wear my Star of David. I didn't want anyone to know who I was, although God used me nonetheless. And I want you to know something. When you're battling with things of depression, there's no quick fix. It's like, well, just feel better. Well, thanks a lot. You notice God didn't tell the prophet, just feel better. Take a nap, get refreshed. I'll get to you eventually. And when I get to you, I'm going to say, what are you doing here? I'm not going to ask you until you're ready to hear that question. Just be real. You're not alone. It's okay not to feel okay. It's okay to not be okay. How you doing? I'm okay. I said, before my sabbatical last year, I was in bad shape. I seriously was considering going off on disability. I said, I just can't go on. I can't do this anymore. Not because God wasn't moving, not because I wasn't excited about what God was doing. It's like I just can't do this anymore. And the reality is I can't. And that's what God finally got to me. He took a month off in exercising. He said, okay, now get back there because you're not doing it. I'm doing it. It's like, oh, great. I knew that. But I had to have a month before he could tell me that. If you're going through something, it's real. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. And if you're not doing okay, you're not doing okay. And it's not a lack of faith. It's just that reality of sometimes I'm not doing okay. And sometimes you're not doing okay. If it's a chemical imbalance, get the right medications. The reality is if your life is out of balance, God is with you to bring you through that time. He will never leave you or forsake you, and you will never be alone. Be blessed, everybody. Shabbat shalom. School of Breath is this afternoon, probably in about an hour. We'll let you know.